Madison stood by her bedroom window, watching the late evening sun dip behind the trees. The quietness of the house settled over her like a heavy blanket. Evan, her husband of 12 years, was once the vibrant center of her world, but now his life revolved around work calls, business deals, and trips that stretched into the night. Their relationship had become a carefully kept routine, a partnership rather than a marriage. Madison had become accustomed to her quiet evenings, but a feeling of absence lingered, like a part of herself that had been packed away for too long. As she made her way to the kitchen, her phone buzzed. A brief message from Evan told her he'd be working late again. She sighed and tapped back a quick, okay, knowing he likely wouldn't see it for hours. This quiet life, these solo dinners, had become her norm, and she wondered when she had stopped being surprised by it. That night, the silence was broken when Alex, her 24-year-old stepson, came in the front door. Recently graduated from college, he had moved back home temporarily while he figured out his next steps. Madison smiled as he dropped his bag on the floor with an easy grin and a joking complaint about the long day he'd had. His presence was like a fresh breeze, his energy filling the house in a way that felt new and refreshing. Madison watched him with a hint of curiosity she couldn't explain, noticing things she hadn't explained, noticing things she hadn't before the confident way he moved, the warmth in his laugh. She busied herself pretending not to notice how often her thoughts drifted back to Alex's smile or his habit of filling each room with an easygoing presence. She wondered if it was just the loneliness or something more complicated. A thought she quickly brushed away. Days went by, and Madison found herself looking forward to Alex coming home. One evening, they sat on the couch watching a movie, laughing at the same scenes. For the first time in ages, Madison felt like someone saw her, someone who appreciated her presence. She leaned a bit closer than usual, but she quickly reminded herself to keep a respectful distance. There was a tension in the room, a subtle spark that neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt later that night. Madison sat alone in her room, a thousand thoughts running through her mind. She realized how much she'd missed feeling connected, appreciated. She barely recognized herself, this woman who longed for attention and warmth, emotions she'd tried so hard to ignore. Standing in front of the mirror, she traced her fingers over her collarbone, reminiscing about when she felt beautiful, desired. She knew she was playing with fire by letting herself imagine a different life, but it was as if her own reflection was asking her how much longer she could go on living in the shadows. The next day, as she prepared lunch in the kitchen, Alex joined her, leaning casually against the counter. They chatted about his plans, his ideas, and Madison felt herself smiling more easily than she had in years. When she handed him a glass, their fingers brushed. It was such a small, innocent gesture, but in that split second, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement, a moment neither of them seemed ready to define. Flustered, Madison turned away, busily arranging things on the counter to distract herself. But her heart was racing, and she knew that beneath her calm exterior, a part of her had already crossed a line she couldn't take back. The following days felt like an uneasy balance for Madison. She tried to dismiss her thoughts about Alex, rationalizing them as harmless, the result of too much time alone, but something had shifted in their dynamic, and she was keenly aware of it. Every accidental touch, every shared glance seemed to add weight to an unspoken connection growing between them. One night, Madison waited up for Evan, hoping he might come home early for once. But as usual, he texted to let her know he'd be later than expected. She put her phone down, frustration tugging at her, wondering when her expectations for their relationship had fallen so low. Not wanting to sit alone with her thoughts, she went to the living room only to find Alex there, focused on his laptop. He looked up and smiled, patting the seat beside him. Madison joined him, trying to ignore the spark of warmth his presence brought her. They began to talk, and the conversation drifted deeper than usual. Madison found herself sharing details of her life with Evan, things she hadn't spoken about in years. Alex listened intently, offering thoughtful responses that made her feel truly heard. She was surprised at how naturally she confided in him, drawn by his genuine interest and empathy. As the evening wore on, Alex shared his own struggles, opening up about feeling lost after college and the pressure he felt to figure out his path. Madison offered words of encouragement, admiring his honesty and vulnerability. For the first time in years, she felt a connection that went beyond the surface, a sense of companionship she hadn't realized she craved so deeply. Their moments together began to stretch into the evenings, quiet talks on the patio or in the kitchen, where their conversations grew more personal, more revealing. Madison felt her defenses slipping, especially as she realized how much Alex understood her in ways Evan hadn't for a long time. Yet, as much as she enjoyed their time together, a sense of guilt began to settle in, shadowing her excitement. One afternoon, while Madison was cleaning up around the house, she heard Alex's voice behind her, startling her out of her thoughts. She turned to see him standing there, looking a little sheepish. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." He laughed softly. She shook her head, smiling, feeling her heart beat faster. It was becoming harder to pretend that his presence was purely comforting, that her reactions were nothing more than a need for companionship. Their conversations and shared moments continued to deepen, and Madison found herself growing increasingly conflicted. On one hand, she felt alive and seen in a way she hadn't in years. On the other, she struggled with the knowledge that these emotions were crossing boundaries she couldn't ignore. She wrestled with the fact that she was feeling things for Alex that went beyond familial affection, emotions that she had carefully set aside in her life with Evan. One evening, Madison and Alex were in the backyard watching the last light of the day fade. She looked at him, sensing his attention on her. Their eyes met, and for a moment she could see a question in his gaze, a curiosity, as if he were searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. Madison felt a nervous excitement, but quickly broke the gaze, looking away to steady herself. She knew she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't rationalize or ignore. The following morning, Madison decided to take a step back. She tried to avoid spending too much time with Alex, convincing herself that it was the right thing to do. She busied herself with errands, focusing on anything that would keep her mind from wandering back to him. But every attempt to maintain distance only seemed to heighten her awareness of him. A few days later, an unexpected storm knocked out the power in the house. Madison and Alex found themselves gathered in the living room by candlelight, sharing stories and laughter to pass the time. The flickering glow made their surroundings feel intimate and warm, casting shadows that seemed to draw them closer together. As the night wore on, Madison felt her resolve slipping again, captivated by his laughter and the quiet intensity in his eyes. At one point, they both reached for the same candle, their hands brushing, lingering for just a second too long. Alex's gaze softened, and Madison felt her breath catch. She saw the hesitation in his face as if he were fighting the same internal struggle. She knew she should pull away, but her body seemed rooted in place, drawn to him by an invisible force. Finally, with her heart pounding, she broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "Alex, I think we should be careful." She looked away, hoping her words would be enough to break the tension. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. Alex nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and something else she couldn't name. "I know," he replied softly. I don't want you to feel alone, Madison." In the days that followed, Madison and Alex maintained a careful distance, both aware of the growing tension but neither willing to address it directly. Their interactions became charged, each glance and gesture loaded with an unspoken awareness. Madison found herself caught between her desire to maintain boundaries and her longing for the warmth and companionship Alex brought into her life. Each day felt like a delicate balance, a constant reminder of the line she was trying so hard not to cross. As the week drew to a close, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that her resolve was slipping, that the boundaries she had set for herself were becoming harder to maintain. Her connection with Alex had become a lifeline, a reminder of everything she had been missing, and the thought of letting it go felt both necessary and impossible. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance between Madison and Alex, each interaction balancing between connection and restraint. Madison told herself to keep things light and casual, but her resolve weakened whenever they were alone. The quiet evenings grew more intense, each shared moment revealing layers of connection she hadn't anticipated. One weekend evening, Evan left for an out of town business meeting. The empty house seemed to amplify Madison's thoughts, but Alex's presence made her feel both comforted and nervous. She suggested they watch a movie to distract themselves, hoping the familiar ritual would help her relax. As the movie played, they found themselves seated a little closer than usual, the warmth of Alex's arm brushing against her. Madison felt her pulse quicken, but she stayed still, her heart racing at his nearness. As the credits rolled, neither moved. In the dim light, Madison turned to find Alex already looking at her, his expression a mix of hesitancy and vulnerability. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to make a choice to decide where things were going. She knew she should step away, but something about his gaze held her in place, making it impossible to look away. Breaking the silence, Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to make things difficult for you, Madison. I feel something and I don't know how to ignore it." His words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Madison felt her resolve crumble. She tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned in, closing the distance, and for a moment their breaths mingled, creating a charged silence that neither wanted to break. Finally, Madison pulled back, overwhelmed by the feelings surging through her. She murmured an apology, excusing herself, and quickly left the room, leaving Alex to sit in silence. The next day, Madison resolved to avoid Alex, thinking space would help her regain control. She kept herself busy, organizing the house, taking a long walk, doing anything to clear her mind. But each time she saw him around the house, her emotions surfaced anew, pulling her back toward that moment on the couch. One afternoon, as she stood at the kitchen sink, Alex walked in and leaned against the counter, watching her quietly. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Unable to ignore it any longer, Madison finally spoke, admitting the confusion and guilt that had haunted her for days. Alex listened patiently, nodding as she explained her inner conflict, the loneliness she had been carrying, and the unexpected comfort she had found in him. "I understand," Alex said softly. "I don't want to make things harder for you, Madison, but I can't pretend I don't feel something. It's just hard to ignore." His confession made Madison's heart ache, both for the boundaries they were crossing and for the undeniable connection she felt. She stepped closer, her hand hovering between them before finally resting on his shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and surrender. They stood in silence, the air between them charged with tension and the weight of their unspoken desires. In the days that followed, their connection only deepened. They shared more private moments, quiet conversations in the late hours, small gestures that felt like secrets just between them. Madison felt herself letting go of her caution, allowing herself to feel, even if she knew it was temporary and complicated. The moments they shared felt like breaths of fresh air, glimpses of joy that reminded her of everything she had been missing. One evening, Madison and Alex were outside watching the stars. She listened to him talk about his dreams, his plans, and his uncertainties, each word pulling her closer to him. When he turned to her, their faces mere inches apart, she felt her heart skip. The world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the warmth of his presence, the calm in his voice, and the steady beat of her own heart. Before she could think twice, she reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. Alex's hand covered hers, holding it there, and in that moment, everything felt inevitable. Madison leaned in, her heart racing, her mind silenced by the intensity of her emotions. Their kiss was slow, tentative at first, as if testing the depth of their connection, but quickly deepened, each of them surrendering to the pull that had drawn them together for weeks afterward. Madison was filled with a confusing mixture of joy and guilt. She knew the line they had crossed, the complexity of their situation, but the comfort she found in Alex, the way he made her feel seen and appreciated, made it difficult to regret. The nights that followed were a blur of secretive glances, whispered words, and stolen moments that filled the emptiness she had felt for so long. As their connection grew, Madison struggled to balance her emotions. She was torn between her loyalty to Evan and the sense of belonging she felt with Alex. They spent more and more time together, finding excuses to be alone, sharing quiet moments that felt like tiny rebellions against the loneliness that had plagued her for years. The house, once filled with silence, now seemed alive with a secret warmth that Madison hadn't felt in ages. One night, Alex and Madison found themselves alone in the living room, the soft glow of a candle illuminating their faces. They spoke in hushed tones, voices softened by the intimacy of their shared secrets. Madison felt a thrill with every word, a quiet exhilaration that made her feel alive in ways she hadn't for years. Alex's hand found hers, his touch warm and steady, and she held on, finding solace in the comfort he brought her. As the days passed, Madison's inner conflict grew. She knew that what she was doing was risky, that the connection she shared with Alex was built on fragile ground. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to end it. She was drawn to him, to the way he made her feel like herself again, unburdened and alive. Their stolen moments were reminders of a side of her that she had lost, a version of herself that longed to feel desired and appreciated and appreciated. Finally, Madison reached a breaking point. One evening, as they sat together, she voiced her fears, her doubts. "Alex," she whispered, "I don't know if we can keep doing this. It's too complicated, too messy." Her words hung between them, heavy with unspoken sorrow. Alex looked at her, his gaze steady and understanding. "Madison," he replied softly, "I know it's complicated, but I also know that what I feel for you isn't something I can just ignore." He took her hand, his expression both tender and resolute. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that this has been real for me." They sat together in silence, their hands intertwined, each of them aware that they were standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Madison felt a mixture of fear and excitement, a sense of anticipation that made her feel both alive and vulnerable. In the quiet moments that followed, Madison made a decision. She knew their relationship couldn't go on like this forever, but she also knew she couldn't walk away, not yet. Their connection had become too important, a source of solace she hadn't found anywhere else. And for now, that was enough. The weekend came quickly, and with it, an unexpected opportunity. Evan left for a last minute business trip, leaving Madison and Alex alone in house, alone in the house. Madison felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She knew this was dangerous territory, but a part of her longed for the closeness they had been building. That evening, Madison and Alex shared dinner in an unusual silence, each seemingly lost in their own thoughts. The unspoken tension simmered between them, filling every moment with a quiet intensity. After they finished eating, Madison cleared the table, her hands trembling slightly as she washed the dishes. She sensed Alex's gaze on her, steady and patient, as if he was waiting for her to make the first move. Finally, he broke the silence. Madison, he said softly, I think we need to talk about what's been happening between us. She turned to face him, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her heart raced as she met his gaze, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I know, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to ignore it, but I can't deny that there's something here, something real. Alex stepped closer, his expression serious and open. I felt it too, he admitted. It's more than just, I don't know. It's something I've never felt before. Without another word, Madison reached out, her hand finding his. They stood there for a moment, their fingers intertwined, a silent understanding passing between them. The barriers they had held up for so long seemed to crumble, leaving only the raw, unfiltered emotions they had both tried to hide. They moved to the living room where the dim light cast soft shadows on their faces. Sitting close together on the couch, they talked in quiet voices, sharing everything they had been holding back. Madison confessed the loneliness she had felt for years, the feeling of being unseen and unappreciated. Alex listened, his hand resting on hers, his presence steady and reassuring. As the night deepened, their conversation drifted to lighter topics, memories from their past, dreams they had, and simple, everyday hope. Madison felt a warmth settle over her, a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Alex's laughter, his gentle teasing, his easy smile, they were all pieces of a life she had forgotten how much she wanted. Eventually, words faded and silence took over. They sat close, the air between them charged with an intensity neither could ignore. Madison leaned in, her breath catching as Alex's hand moved to her cheek, his touch soft and reassuring. Their kiss was slow, a tentative exploration of the connection they had both been denying. But as their lips met, the careful restraint they had practiced melted away, replaced by a hunger that had been building for weeks. The hours that followed were a blur of passion and intimacy, each moment leaving them both breathless and exhilarated. Madison felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, each touch and whispered word pulling her further from the carefully constructed life she had known. The walls she had built around herself crumbled as she surrendered to the warmth of Alex's embrace. Afterward, they lay together in the quiet of the early morning, wrapped in each other's arms. Madison felt a strange mixture of contentment and fear, knowing that they had crossed a line they couldn't undo. She looked over at Alex, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't bound by duty or expectation, where she could freely follow her heart. But reality crept back in, and with it, a flood of doubt. She knew they couldn't stay in this bubble forever. Eventually, they would have to face the consequences of their choices. The thought left her feeling both exhilarated and trapped, caught between the life she wanted and the one she knew she had to return to. Over the next few days, Madison and Alex shared stolen moments, each one filled with the thrill of secrecy and the weight of unspoken fears. They became experts at quiet glances, hidden smiles, and brief touches that spoke volumes without a word. Madison felt torn, caught between her loyalty to Evan and her desire for Alex. The connection she shared with Alex had become her refuge, a place where she felt alive, valued, and seen. One afternoon, while they were in the kitchen, Evan called, his voice cheerful and warm. Madison tried to act natural, but the guilt gnawed at her, coloring every word she spoke. She ended the call quickly, her hands shaking as she put the phone down. Alex placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression full of understanding. It's hard, I know, he said quietly. But whatever happens, you're not alone in this. His words were a comfort, a reminder that she wasn't facing her feelings in isolation. But the conflict within her grew stronger with each passing day. She knew that their relationship couldn't stay hidden forever, and the thought of what might happen if Evan found out filled her with dread that evening. As they sat together in the dim light of the living room, Madison voiced her fear. "I don't know how long we can keep doing this, Alex," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "I feel like I'm being torn in two." Alex reached for her hand, his gaze steady. "I know it's complicated," he replied, his voice gentle. "But whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. You don't have to carry this alone." His reassurance gave her a sense of peace, but the reality of their situation remained. She knew that a decision would have to be made, that they couldn't keep living in this suspended state forever. The weight of that realization settled over her, a reminder of the complexity of the life they had chosen. As the night wore on, Madison found herself leaning into Alex's presence, allowing herself to savor the moments they shared. That beneath the surface, a part of her knew that their time together was fragile, a fleeting respite from the responsibilities and obligations waiting for her. The weekend came to an end, and with it, Evan's return. Madison felt a sense of dread as she prepared for his arrival, knowing that the life she had created with Alex would have to be hidden once again. When Evan walked through the door, smiling and relaxed, she forced herself to put on a brave face, burying the emotions that had filled her over the past few days. As they settled into their routine, Madison felt the strain of keeping her feelings concealed. Each glance, each touch from Alex had to be carefully hidden, each interaction carefully managed to avoid suspicion. The weight of this secrecy began to wear on her, and she realized that the path she had chosen was not sustainable. The days passed in a tense silence, the unspoken connection between her and Alex hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Madison found herself torn, unable to let go of the life she had built with Alex, but unwilling to shatter the one she shared with Evan. She knew a decision was looming, a choice that would determine the course of her life, and the thought left her feeling both exhilarated and terrified. Evan's return to the house marked a new phase for Madison and Alex, one filled with unspoken tension. Every interaction with Evan felt like a test of her resolve, each word and gesture a reminder of the secret she was hiding. The thrill of stolen moments with Alex was quickly replaced by a growing sense of dread. She felt caught between two lives, each pulling her in a different direction, and the weight of her choices began to consume her thoughts. Madison did her best to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the strain of keeping secrets was beginning to show. Her laughter with Evan felt forced, her smiles hollow. Even Alex noticed the shift, sensing the distance growing between them as she struggled with the duality of her emotions. They shared fewer stolen glances, fewer secret touches, both aware that something had to give one evening. Madison found herself alone in the backyard, the cool night air helping her think more clearly. She hadn't been alone with her thoughts like this for a while, and the reality of her situation was unavoidable. She thought back on the past weeks, the excitement and comfort she had found with Alex, the feelings she had thought were long buried. But she also thought of Evan, the man she had built a life with, the promises they had made, and the trust they shared, trust she had betrayed. Alex joined her outside, sensing her turmoil. He sat beside her, silent at first, then finally asked, "Madison, what are we going to do?" She looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of their connection. "I don't know, Alex," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Alex nodded, understanding, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Neither did I. But here we are, and we can't keep pretending this isn't happening." They sat in silence, each wrestling with their thoughts. Madison knew he was right. They couldn't continue living in the shadows, caught between secrecy and the reality of their lives. She had to make a choice, but the thought of letting go of Alex felt like a wound that would never heal. The following days were filled with a quiet tension as Madison distanced herself from Alex, trying to find clarity. She avoided lingering glances and secret touches, keeping their conversations short and casual. The connection that had once filled her with joy now felt like a burden, each moment a reminder of the lines they had crossed. One evening, Madison sat alone in the living room, reflecting on everything she had been through. Her mind drifted to memories of her life with Evan, the shared milestones, the laughter, the moments of comfort and companionship. She thought about the future they had imagined together, a future she had once believed in wholeheartedly. Despite the distance that had grown between them, she knew that their life together mattered, that it was something she couldn't easily discard. But as much as she valued her life with Even, she couldn't ignore the impact Alex had made on her. He had reminded her of parts of herself she had forgotten, a warmth and aliveness that had long been missing. The choice before her was agonizing no matter what she decided. Someone would be hurt, and she would have to face the consequences of her actions. That night, she approached Alex, her heart heavy with the decision she had reached. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then finally spoke. "Alex," she began, her voice breaking slightly, "we need to end this. I can't keep living in two worlds. It's tearing me apart, and it's not fair to any of us." Alex's expression fell, and Madison could see the pain in his eyes. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as if trying to hold on to what they had for just a moment longer. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that this was real for me. You mean more to me than I can put into words." Tears welled up in Madison's eyes as she looked at him, feeling the weight of everything they had shared. "You mean so much to me, too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me of who I used to be, of everything I thought I had lost. But I have to try to make things right with Evan." "I owe him that much," Alex nodded, his hand slipping from hers as he accepted her decision. They stood there in silence, the depth of their connection unspoken yet undeniable. Madison felt a wave of grief wash over her, but she knew that this was the only way forward. They couldn't continue hiding, pretending that their actions wouldn't have consequences. Over the next few days, Madison focused on repairing her relationship with Evan, trying to bring honesty and effort back into their marriage. She spent more time with him, shared her thoughts and concerns, and worked to rebuild the connection they had lost. It was difficult, and the weight of her choices lingered, but she was determined to make amends, to rekindle what they once had. As time passed, the intensity of her feelings for Alex softened, becoming a bittersweet memory, a reminder of a chapter that had brought both joy and pain. She saw him less frequently, each encounter marked by a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of what they had shared and the decisions they had made. Though the ache remained, Madison felt a sense of peace slowly returning to her. She had made a difficult choice, one that came with sacrifice and loss, but she knew it was the right one. She had been given a chance to rediscover herself, to confront the complexities of her heart, and to find a way forward. In the end, Madison's journey left her with a deeper understanding of herself, a recognition of her own vulnerabilities and desires. She knew that her life would never be the same, but she had found a way to reconcile the different parts of herself, to honor both her past and the person she had become. Madison and Alex shared one final unspoken goodbye, a glance that carried all the words they hadn't said, the feelings they hadn't expressed, the feelings they hadn't expressed. She watched him walk away, knowing that they had both found something they needed, even if it was fleeting. As she turned back toward her home, she felt a quiet strength within her, a determination to move forward with honesty and purpose. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she had found a path she could live with, a choice that felt true to her. And in that moment, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. The weeks following Madison's decision brought a sense of quiet clarity. Life returned to a steady rhythm, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. She had chosen her marriage, and though it came with difficult sacrifices, she felt a renewed commitment to honesty and openness with Evan. Each day was a conscious effort to rebuild trust and rediscover the companionship they had once shared. Madison took steps to communicate more with Evan, expressing her feelings openly, a habit they had both let slip over the years. To her relief, he responded in kind, noticing the changes in her and reciprocating with renewed attention and care. Their conversations grew deeper, no longer weighed down by the silence that had once settled between them. They talked about their future, their hopes, and the goals they had once shared but had somehow set aside. One evening, as they sat on the porch under a starlit sky, Evan took her hand, his expression softer than she had seen in years. "I know things have been hard for us, Madison. I'm sorry for the times I wasn't there. I never realized how much distance had grown between us." His words were sincere, and Madison felt the lingering ache in her heart begin to ease. Madison met his gaze, offering him a smile. "I felt the same. I think I got lost in trying to keep everything together, but I forgot to tell you what I needed to. I want us to find a way back to each other, Evan. I'm willing to try." In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were committed to finding a way forward together. Madison realized that while her connection with Alex had sparked something within her, it had also shown her the parts of herself she had neglected. She had rediscovered her capacity to feel deeply, and she wanted to bring that renewed energy into her marriage. As the days turned into months, Madison saw Alex less often, and each encounter held a quiet, mutual respect. Their last shared glance had conveyed a simple truth. They had each left a lasting impact on the other, but it was time to let go. Madison knew she would always hold a piece of those memories close, a reminder of the parts of herself she had reclaimed, but they remained only that, memories. Life continued, and with each passing day, Madison felt stronger and more grounded. She and Evan began planning small trips together, taking time to explore the city on weekends, rediscovering the companionship they had once taken for granted. Madison noticed that her laughter came easier, her smile more genuine, and she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. One day, while tidying up her desk, she found a small keepsake from her time with Alex, a book he had recommended, a quiet gift he had left on the kitchen table one morning. She held it for a moment, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. She remembered the warmth of their conversations, the unexpected connection that had once filled her life. But as she placed the book back on the shelf, she felt no regret, only gratitude for what the experience had taught her. In the quiet of a late summer afternoon, Madison sat by the window watching the light filter through the trees. She felt a sense of contentment that was rare, a feeling of being at peace with her choices. The journey she had taken, as tumultuous as it had led her back to herself, giving her the courage to face her life with newfound honesty and resilience.